Have you ever imagined like a world where women ruled and judged fairly and had equal rights?
Wow.
And then imagine that world being ripped away because men felt threatened.
That's
That's the story of Libuše, a prophetic princess who ruled the land that would become Bohemia,
fascinating.
and whose legacy is like woven into Czech culture.
Yeah.
So today we're diving into the legend of Libuše and her impact on the Czech people. We're going to explore the legends, examine the historical context, and uncover how her story has been reinterpreted.
It really is amazing how these ancient myths and legends, they still resonate with us centuries later.
Right.
Libusche's story is so intriguing because it raises questions about gender dynamics and power structures that are still relevant.
Absolutely. We've got some incredible sources for this deep dive. Excerpts from the podcast Libuše and Her City Touching the Stars, insights of the book Prague in Black and Gold, and even commentary from historians who have dedicated their lives to separating
Oh, wow.
fact from fiction.
I'm excited to see what we uncover.
Me too.
Oh.
Well,
Let's start by setting the scene. According to legend, Libuše was one of 3 daughters born to Krok, the leader of a Slavic tribe,
okay.
that migrated westward. Each daughter possessed unique gifts, but Libuše was said to be the wisest and most beautiful, with a remarkable gift for prophecy.
It's interesting that her beauty is emphasized alongside her wisdom. I wonder if that was like a common trope in those days, a way to make a powerful woman's authority more palatable
Yeah.
by associating it with her appearance.
It's a great observation, and we see that throughout history, right? Was it to make these women less threatening, or perhaps even to subtly undermine their authority by suggesting that it was tied to their looks rather than their intellect?
Yeah, definitely makes you think. But regardless of how her beauty was perceived, Libuše was ultimately chosen as ruler because of her wisdom and prophetic abilities, even though she was the youngest of the 3 sisters.
Right, and this is key because it establishes a precedent for a woman holding a position of power, something that wasn't the norm at the time, as we'll soon see.
Okay, so she's ruling, she's using her wisdom and prophecies to guide her people. Everything seems to be going well. But then comes this pivotal moment where she has to resolve a land dispute between 2 men,
Okay.
and her judgment sparks outrage.
Oh.
Right.
Why?
Why?
Because she's a woman.
Because she's a woman, right? The older man who loses the dispute really lets her have it. He launches into this tirade, questioning her ability to rule and judge fairly simply because of her gender. He even throws out insults like long-haired but short on brains.
Wow, talk about adding insult to injury. But it does reveal a lot about the societal anxieties surrounding female leadership, doesn't it?
Absolutely. His outburst highlights this deeply ingrained belief that women were incapable of rational thought or leadership, that their place was in the domestic sphere.
It's almost as if her rule was accepted and even celebrated until a man felt personally slighted by her decision. That speaks volumes about how power dynamics shift when a woman challenges the existing order. Precisely. And Libusche's response to all this is both fascinating and heartbreaking. She actually agrees to step down, acknowledging the people's desire for a male ruler.
Wait, she just gives up her position after ruling so successfully?
Well, she doesn't just hand over the reins without making sure there's a worthy successor. This is where her famous prophecy of Przemysl comes in.
Ah, yes, the plowman turned duke. I'm curious about this one.
So Libuše falls into a trance and describes this man, Przemysl, in great detail. What he looks like, what he'll be doing when they find him. She says he'll be eating from an iron table when they find him.
And sure enough, that's exactly what happens. A delegation is sent out, and they find Przemysl, just as Libuše described. They even witness his staff sprouting buds, which is seen as a symbol of his future lineage.
That imagery is so rich with meaning. The iron table representing strength and resilience, the sprouting staff signifying growth and prosperity. It's almost as if she's choosing a man who embodies the qualities she herself possesses as a leader.
It's like she's saying, okay, fine, you want a man in charge, but I get to choose him and he better be good.
Exactly. And his responses to the delegation further reinforce this idea. He emphasizes the importance of hard work, humility, and treating everyone as equals, qualities that stand in stark contrast to the previous ruler who was all about asserting his dominance and dismissing women's contributions.
It almost seems like he's trying to live up to the legacy Libuše established. He recognizes the importance of those values that she brought to her leadership.
I think you're right. It's a subtle but significant detail that speaks to how her influence continued even after she stepped down.
Which brings us to Libuše's most enduring legacy, the founding of Prague. This is where her story truly takes on a mythical quality.
While gazing out over the Vltava River, she has this incredible vision of a magnificent city. A city whose fame she predicts will touch the stars.
It's pretty amazing that even centuries later, her name is still linked to this iconic city.
What's also intriguing is the etymology of the word Praha, the Czech word for Prague. Some believe it's connected to the idea of a threshold, a place where people bow their heads as they enter. It adds another layer to Libuše's vision, suggesting she saw Prague not just as a powerful city, but also as a welcoming one, a place of respect and humility.
But unfortunately, things take a dark turn after Libuše steps down. Those anxieties surrounding female rule, they don't just disappear with Przemysł's ascension to the throne.
No, they don't. In fact, they erupt in a dramatic and violent fashion. The sources describe a period of growing resentment among women, particularly Libuše's former maidens.
So it's not just about the ruler being a man, it's about the entire power structure shifting and women feeling like their rights and status are being stripped away.
Exactly. And this resentment eventually boils over into what's known as the Maidens' War, a full-blown rebellion led by Vlasta Libuše's most trusted maiden.
Wow, a full-blown rebellion. This is where the story gets really interesting. I'm eager to hear more about this Maidens' War, but I think we'll have to save that for part 2 of our deep dive.
So we left off with this simmering tension between women, especially Libuše's former maidens, and the new patriarchal order under Przemysl.
Yeah, definitely. I'm ready to hear more about this Maidens' War, led by Libuše's trusted maiden Vlasta.
Right. It's portrayed as this incredibly organized and strategic uprising. Vlasta realizing the women are losing their voice and power rallies, Libuše's former maidens, and essentially forms a female army.
So they're not just like passively accepting this shift in power, they're actively resisting.
Exactly. They fortify a castle Devane, which becomes their stronghold, and they even employ cunning tactics to outsmart the men. Some accounts describe them using disguises and trickery to infiltrate enemy camps.
Wow. It's incredible to think about the level of planning and coordination involved. This wasn't just a spontaneous outburst, it was a calculated rebellion.
Yeah, and it wasn't without its casualties. The sources paint a very brutal picture of this conflict, with descriptions of poisonings, ambushes, and even massacres on both sides.
It makes you wonder if some of these accounts were embellished over time.
Yeah.
To really drive home the point about the dangers of female rebellion.
That's a valid point. It's hard to separate fact from fiction in these ancient tales. But regardless of the specifics, the Maidens' War highlights the deep-seated animosity that had developed between men and women in this society.
So how does it all end?
Tragically, as most rebellions do in these stories, Vlasta is ultimately killed in battle. And with her leadership gone, the rebellion crumbles. The women's fortress Devane is destroyed, symbolizing the crushing defeat of their fight for equality.
It's a stark reminder of the cost of challenging those in power, especially when the power structure is deeply rooted in patriarchal norms.
It is. And it's almost as if Libuše's earlier prediction about the pitfalls of male rule comes true. The freedoms and equality she fostered were quickly eroded, leading to this devastating conflict.
Right. It's a powerful reminder that progress isn't always linear. Sometimes there are setbacks. Sometimes the fight for equality faces fierce resistance.
And speaking of history, it's important to acknowledge that while this legend is captivating, there's no concrete evidence to support Libuše's actual existence.
So she's more of a mythical figure, a representation of an ideal ruler rather than a historical one.
That seems to be the consensus among historians. They believe these legends were likely passed down orally through generations, shaped and reshaped over time, before being documented centuries later by writers like Cosmas of Prague in the 11th century.
Cosmas of Prague, that name rings a bell.
He was a chronicler who played a significant role in documenting early Bohemian history. In fact, he borrowed Libuše's famous line about Prague's fame touching the stars from Virgil's Aeneid.
Really? So he was weaving together elements from other literary sources to create this narrative of early Bohemian history.
It seems so. It's a reminder that these stories were often influenced by the cultural and literary trends of the time. Fact and fiction were blended in ways that are difficult to disentangle.
Okay, so if Libuše might not be a real historical figure who is considered the more accurate founder of Prague,
that would be Duke Boživoj, whose rule began around 870 CE. He's documented as the first Duke of Bohemia, and the one who really established the Przemysl dynasty. He built Prague Castle, and was Bohemia's first Christian ruler.
Wait, the Przemysl dynasty? As in Libuše's husband, Przemysl? Is there a connection?
Well, that's where the lines get blurry again. It's claimed that Boživoj was a descendant of Libuše and Przemysl, but historically it's impossible to confirm. Some historians believe he was actually related to a completely different Slavic dynasty.
So we've got this blend of Myths and historical figures making it difficult to pinpoint what actually happened.
It's a bit like trying to solve a historical jigsaw puzzle with missing pieces. But even if we can't definitively connect Bourgeois to Libuše and Przemysl, his role in establishing Prague as a powerful center is undeniable.
And what about the Maiden's War? Is there any historical evidence to back up this dramatic rebellion?
That's a question that has sparked debate among historians. Some believe it was inspired by ancient tales of Amazonian warriors. You know, those mythical societies where women were the dominant force?
Fascinating. So it's possible that Cosmas of Prague, who we know borrowed from other literary sources, might have incorporated this motif of powerful female warriors into his account of Bohemian history.
That's one theory. Others suggest it might have been inspired by actual events, perhaps a local uprising or conflict that got amplified and mythologized over time.
So there's no definitive answer. It could be a blend of literary tropes and actual historical events that got woven together to create this captivating narrative.
Exactly. And Václav Bruzek, the director of Prague's city archives, makes an interesting point. He says the idea of a matriarchal society being overthrown by men is a recurring theme in many cultures, including ancient Greece.
So it's possible Cosmas was tapping into a broader cultural narrative, one that resonated with people across different times and places.
Precisely. And even if the Maiden's War is more fiction than fact, its symbolic power is undeniable. It speaks to those anxieties about female power, the potential for chaos when women challenge the established order and the lengths men will go to maintain their dominance.
It also makes you wonder about those what-if scenarios. What if the women had won? What if Libuše's vision of a more egalitarian society had prevailed?
Those are great questions. And that's what makes Libuše's story so compelling. Even if she might be more myth than historical figure, she embodies both the aspirations and anxieties of a society grappling with shifting gender roles and the very nature of power.
It's amazing how a legend can spark such thought-provoking discussions.
It really is, and her impact extends beyond history and into the world of art and culture.
Right. We were about to dive into that. I'm particularly interested in Biedrzycza Smetana's opera Libuše. Can you tell me more about that?
Smetana's masterpiece. It's considered this grand celebration of Czech history and identity. It premiered at the opening of the National Theatre in Prague in 1881. Talk about a grand entrance. But I read that Smetana's opera doesn't stick strictly to the original legend.
Yeah, that's right. Well, the first act portrays Libuše ruling, resolving disputes, and choosing Przemysl. The later acts shift the focus to the male characters. We get their backstories, motivations, and a love triangle is even introduced.
Oh.
So they downplay Libuše's role. That's ironic considering the opera is supposed to be a tribute to her.
It does seem contradictory, doesn't it? It highlights how narratives, even those intended to honor strong women, can be reshaped to fit the prevailing social norms. Even in an opera meant to celebrate Libuše, the men end up taking center stage.
Yeah, perhaps it reflects the ongoing struggle for gender equality in art and society. Even when we try to celebrate women's achievements, those ingrained biases can creep in.
Precisely. It's a reminder to be mindful of how narratives are presented and whose voices are amplified, even in creative interpretations.
So after exploring Libuše's legend, delving into the historical context, and even touching upon its artistic interpretations, what does it all mean? What does her legacy tell us about ourselves and our expectations of leadership?
That's the core question, isn't it? I think Libuše's story, whether entirely factual or mythical, forces us to examine those deep-seated biases that still associate leadership with masculinity. You know, it makes you wonder how differently might history have unfolded if women like Libuše were allowed to exercise power without facing those societal constraints.
It's a tantalizing thought. A world where leadership is defined not by gender, but by qualities like wisdom, compassion, and a vision for a better future. Those are the qualities Libuše embodied, and perhaps her story can inspire us to continue striving for a more equitable world where all voices are heard and celebrated.
I wholeheartedly agree. The echoes of these ancient tales, whether about Libuše or countless other inspiring figures, continue to shape our understanding of the world and encourage us to question the narratives we've been told.
Well, this has been an incredibly thought-provoking deep dive into the legend of Libuše. It's amazing how these stories from the past can still spark such relevant discussions today.
And who knows what other hidden gems we'll uncover as we continue to explore the rich tapestry of human history.
If you enjoyed our deep dive into Libuše's legend, don't forget to subscribe and join us for our next episode, where we'll be uncovering another captivating story from the past. Until then, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those minds open.